So I've been playing a 4X game from 5 years ago called Era of Tribes. And on the subject of indie, this is very much an indie game. It's an endeavor by the designer Arne Lorenz, and it's published by Black Beacon Games. And I believe this is self-published through crowdfunding. I think that's his own company. They're called, or abbreviated to BBG on the box. And this was crowdfunded, delivered, and selling in 2019. And I remember seeing it around at Essen years ago when we went there. I sort of passed it by. I was like, oh, Era of Tribes. That looks like area control on a map, sort of civilization building. I like that sort of stuff. But then I never actually got around to trying it. And Arne has brought out a plan for a reprint with a new expansion, which is coming to crowdfunding in November, early November. And so asked if he could send me a copy. And I said I'd play it and I'd talk about it on the podcast. And here it is. This is a 1 to 4 player competitive civilization building game, 4X style game, with solo and cooperative variants. There is a 5 to 6 player expansion. And with the 5 to 6 player expansion, you can also expand the 2 player co-op to 3 player co-op. This version I have is the second edition, but it's notable that when Arne sent it to me, it came with a ton of stickers to put across everything. So there's clearly a third edition, I guess, version. That's probably what will be coming to crowdfunding, although I don't know how much that will resemble the edition that's finally delivered to people based on the success of the campaign. There is also a copy of the expansion that they sent me, but I haven't had a chance to play it. I've just played the core game. It's quite a heavy game. I played it at 3 players. None of us had played it before. I learned the rules, and the rule book is quite substantial. At its core, it is a map of Europe and outer territories, so the whole Mediterranean and some of the East as well. And you will block off sections of the board based on where you want to play, based on your player count. And again, it's sort of flexible. It says, if you don't like the conflict part of the game, if you want more freedom, then you just don't block off any parts of the board, But if you want people to be engaging in the combat side of the game, then, block off this much of the board, play with these areas. And then each tribe is a European civilization or sort of Mediterranean civilization, that sort of area. So if you block off the north, you'll be playing with the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Iberians. If you block off the south, you'll have the Gauls, the Gaelic, that kind of stuff. And so in our game, we blocked off the north part of the board. We're playing on the south part of the board, and when you take your tribe, it will also give you your starting territories on the map. And each territory will have some food, which is absolutely vital to feed your civilization, and some resources, which come in 2 types. There's luxury resources, which are largely interchangeable. There are many types of them, wine, silk, iPhones, but there is no real difference unless you're specifically a tribe that will reference the luxury resources. So like certain tribes can do things with beer or wine, but we didn't have any of those tribes. So we were just only caring about luxury resources. And then there's some war resources as well, horses and ore that you can use to bolster your armies. So you lay out on the board, you get those things. Everyone gets a little hidden objective tile. Some more objective tiles come out on the board. And then the game is set up so that there are certain end game conditions. So you occupy 25 land territories. That triggers the end game. We played what is called the normal game. You can play the longer game and the epic game. You will go advance through eras. So I think the 4th era is called Ancient Times. And if you're playing the normal game, somebody getting to Ancient Times also triggers the end of the game. You can go all the way up through medieval times and things like that, though, if you're playing a longer version. There is an endgame trigger where someone, I think, I can't remember what the other ones are. Build all your cities, I think, might be one of them. Research a certain number of technologies is definitely one of them. there is a very intriguing technology rondel where it does something I like, actually, where technologies become cheaper when other people have researched them, but you get points for researching the most. You have a victory point tracker around the board, and also what's called your victory parade. And the victory parade is a little token that advances around the victory points track in the opposite direction whenever you win combats. And then it gives you bonuses as it advances. And if the two tokens cross, that's another in-game condition. So, you've got these different in-game triggers, and then you'll go to a sort of a final scoring where everyone will total up their in-game scoring, and then whoever has the most points is the winner, with some tie breaks as well. And round to round, all you've got is a player board with all the actions you can take on it. So it's not worker placement. You're not competing for action spots. Everyone's got their own unique action spots on their board, and you've got these leaders and the luxury resources, and you commit them to action spots on your board in order to generate what you need. And the core game loop is really focused around this one action called expansion, because expansion allows you to conquer more territories. It also allows you to go into conflict. So if you occupy a territory with barbarians or a rival player at the end of your expansion action, that will trigger conflict. There is also, notably, an auto-expansion phase, which happens at the end of everyone's actions. So functionally, you're going to be using these leaders, which are a bit like workers, to trigger the actions on your board, but you can commit multiple leaders to the same action in order to power it up. So you could blow through all your leaders on your first turn, doing one big action, and then just pass for the round. Or alternatively, you can take lots of different actions, but you can't take the same action twice using in the same round. So, if you want a big version of it, you have to commit to it all at once. But later on, when you get 3 or 4 leaders, you could do, one minor action to start and then maybe put 2 leaders into something else later on. And after everyone's passed, you're going to go into the auto expansion phase where everyone gets a free expansion action unless you did one earlier. And so planning around that is like kind of an important consideration. But if you do it as an action on your turn, you can commit leaders to it, which power it up, which means that it might be more worthwhile doing it on your turn. Additionally, you might be contesting territory with people, So if you're worried they're going to expand into those spaces you want, again, you might take the expansion action on your turn to make sure you can guarantee get the spots you want. So there's this morale track, which is tracking the sort of how happy people are in your civilization, and that goes down constantly. You'll fluctuate up and down, just riding from the very top of the track to the bottom of the track in a heartbeat, and making sure you manage that is really crucial to success as well, because going over the top of it is not particularly helpful. You get some money, which is nice, but going off the bottom of it loses you victory points, and they're quite hard to come by. So you don't really want to be going off the bottom of the morale track. Additionally, there's a your higher morale helps and can help in combat. So, that's another benefit of staying up high on it. But these actions that you've got on your board, they're things like, other than the expansion action, they're things like tax your people. You'll get a bunch of money, but drop down on that morale track. You can commit trade, where you'll get less money, but you won't lose morale. You can go to bread and circuses, which is sort of like a commitment to fun and games within your civilization, raises morale back up. You can go to diplomacy, which allows you to recruit more leaders. It also allows you to gain these treaty tokens, which can later be used to force players to trade territories to you and things like that. You can also force alliances on players and put traders in their cities to help bolster your trade action. And there is also the technology action, which is going to allow you to go to that technology rondel, and you can start to research all these different technologies, and they're going to allow you to put out more cities. And they're going to allow your ships to move faster, your military to be stronger and move faster. You can increase your trade revenue there as well. And you can also just get points. The culture technology is just points. So it's a more like investment in the arts, I suppose. And then the more you sort of get, the cheaper sort of linked technologies become. So there's this sort of sense of them being interwoven. So if you have good technology, good military technology, for example, then trade and city building becomes cheaper. But there's also a benefit for being the first one to do those things, to research the technologies. But by dint of being the first one, you get some points and then everyone else gets them cheaper. So it's modeling a lot of stuff. And functionally, the actions are actually very quick to take. So to start off the bat, I went into this with actually quite low expectations because the rulebook's quite a hard read. And also it's an indie game, self-published, right? So it's completely unedited, so to speak. But I'd noticed that it's got quite a high rating on BGG, and there seems to be a real cult following for it. So I was definitely keen to check it out and see what it was all about. And having played it now, I can see where the love for this comes from. Oh yeah, there's this mechanism as well where you've got like these vassals, and they become everything. So, you need these vassal tokens to control the territories. They become your armies, they become your ships. And then you can only unlock more of them by building cities. So you've got these cities locked up in your sort of development track, and you have to build the cities on the map in order to unlock more vassals. So there's this sort of sense of managing the expansion of your kingdom, which is really cool, actually. I thought that was a really cool mechanism. And the more cities you build, at the top of every round, you're going to lose a bunch of morale because you've got these cities out. Because it's just people are harder, big numbers of people are just harder to manage. I thought that was really clever. I liked that mechanism. And I can sort of see where the cult following for this game has come from, because it models a lot of stuff. And it does so in a way that's reasonably fast to resolve. Like the combat is also quite quick it's dice combat. But the way it works is that there are 2 dice and they've got a series of different faces, slightly different probabilities on each. So you could say one is slightly skewed towards certain characteristics and one the other. Because the way the combat works really is that you've got a bunch of tokens and they get assigned to attackers and defenders based on how high you are up that military track, who has the most morale, who's got more numbers. And so you give these tokens out and then you roll the dice. And then if the dice faces show the tokens that you have, you kill your opponents. So that's kind of a really nice idea. So you're looking to try to sort of shore up all of the advantages on your side, which again is a cool way of modeling that sort of, top level, high level combat, But most of the actions, with the exception of the expansion action, are really quick to resolve on your turn. Do a technology, up your morale, do a trade. Like the turns happen really quickly, and it's quite a snappy game despite all the complexity. So I think that's kind of where this sort of cult following has developed, because it models a lot. Everything is sort of interworking. There's a lot of sort of different moving parts and a lot of sort of these little elements to engage with, but functionally the downtime is relatively low, and because you can only do one expansion action per turn, it's like everyone gets one big action per turn, and then the rest of their actions are fairly quick to resolve. That's great. I don't know if a lot of people actually get to see this side of the game, because the rulebook's really tough. It's clearly written by a designer who is almost like keeping a very explicit set of notes. It is not an accessible document, but it is very precise. You won't have rules questions that are not answered by the rules document, with one exception. But it is not easy reading, and so it might be quite difficult to access the actual game. And this is not helped by the iconography. Once you understand the iconography in the game, it's okay, but there's a lot of it, and it's not the most intuitive. It's a barrier. It's not actually helpful, really. It's not unhelpful, actually, but it's also not helpful. It's kind of what's the term I'm looking for here, Barry? When it's not a net loss.
Neutral.
It breaks even. It breaks even.
Yeah.
But it wants a really nice lick of sort of paint, like a really nice graphic designer to sort of help out with these things. It wants a rulebook editor to make this more accessible. And to that point, it wants, I think, a little bit of editing as well. just like sort of, a little bit of mechanical streamlining. Because I think there's a really promising title here, and I can see why it's really engaged with a lot of people, because it models that sort of 4X civilization building in a way that sort of gives you lots of options, lots of toys to play with, but does so in a way that's sort of snappy. And it could feel, I think, like there's a lot of dead actions, because you're taking, bread and circuses, go up morale track. Now I'm going to take taxes. I get money and go back down morale track. Now I have to do something else to go back on morale track. But the systems work together in a satisfying enough way that you don't really notice the dead actions, I don't think. Or they don't feel like that. It's sort of like, all right, how am I going to manage this? Can I get that from somewhere else? So I think, if you're sort of into these sort of it's very sandboxy as well. Trying to discern how to actually win is quite challenging. I think for it's the opposite of the, Alt-A starting technology. This gives you no indication of what you need to do to win, other than these two. That's kind of a lie, right? It gives you the starting tile, or your victory point tile at the start that says you're going to earn points at the end of the game for this, and then it gives you 2 more face up on the board. However, if you want to go up that era track that I spoke about, if you want to progress through the different stages of civilization, then every time you have to have a revolution. So you have to meet a certain number of criterias, like have built this many cities, have researched this many technologies, and then you qualify to advance. And then you have to have a revolution in order to actually advance. And when you do that, you will A, get points for doing it first, and B, you can pick one of those 2 face-up objective tiles on the board, you score it for yourself, and then it goes away, and a new one is dealt out. Which I wasn't sure how I felt about, because it does feel a little bit like a positive feedback loop, where often the first person to progress is going to get those every time. But it didn't play out that way. There were definitely 2 of us who were sort of in contention to be the first one into each age. Because the revolution action kills your whole turn. The minute you do a revolution, you are done. You're not even going to get auto expand if you didn't expand. So that's the timing around that is quite tasty, right? Because it's like, oh, do I have a revolution now? Because I'm going to get all the points for the objective and the points for being first. But then I'm going to have to sack off my whole round and potentially lose a bunch of actions. Furthermore, you become very vulnerable to attack. When you're in a revolution, you have a number of penalties in combat. We did not get to do any player versus player in our game. In fact, our civilizations barely touched each other. Now, I don't know if that's because we were new players, we were inexperienced players. I was largely the only one that actually engaged in combat, by dint of the fact that there are not that many barbarians on the board, and the ones that there was a handful near me, and then the others would need to be sought out. Now, combat advances your victory parade, which gives you bonuses. And so there is incentive to do it, and I do think there's value in doing it. I also think it's a fun mini game. To be fair, it is like a bit like gambling, and I do enjoy that. So there's a luck-based element there that I enjoyed engaging with. I don't know if the player versus player combat would feel a little bit bad, or, again, it's going to have that Alt-A problem, right? If you're going to be sort of locked into a certain position where it might be difficult for you to pick on the right people, the winners, the ones that are in the lead. On the flip side, you can make alliances with people, and they will be penalized if they break the alliance. So, I mean, you can also be punished if you have a lot of traitors in someone's civilization and they betray you. All your traitors get kicked out, unless you agree not to do that. So there's quite a lot of flexibility around how you sort of manage your relationships with other players and things like that, even though it's very sort of binary, right? Like there's the general table talk, and that's going to be based on your group. You can make non-binding agreements, of course you can, because it's a game with targeted player interaction, but there's no formal rules for that. There are a lot of formal rules for exchanging traders and forming alliances and stuff like that, which you can still engage with. and you can make that part of your non-binding discussions. But if that sort of stuff, but I think, if somebody's running away with the game, you might need to engage with that more. However, I did feel like in the normal length game, we didn't get to engage in some of the deeper mechanisms. Probably, again, because we're all new to the game, we didn't know the full sort of depth of it. We didn't understand that. We were mostly just focusing on sort of pushing the different buttons to see what would happen. And also because, I think in that normal length game, it's actually a bit too short to get really into the weeds of that stuff. Maybe the game wants you to be more focused. We definitely wound up doing a bit of everything on the technology track. I do think you need to diversify, though. Anyway, it was interesting. I think the biggest issue I'm going to have now is those two players I played with are my friends from out of town. And now I think the next time I play, I'm going to have to teach it again. And it's also long. It's like it's a whole afternoon, it's a good 4-hour, 5-hour game, I think. If people were really across the rules and had internalized it, it would be faster. If there were better iconography and better player aids, it would be faster. I think you could get this to be quite quick, quite a lot quicker than it is. But it's so sort of indie that, it's not like Root where I bring it out and everyone's like, oh, we know how to play Root now, because it's in the collective consciousness. Era of Tribes, really intriguing big game. And coming back to crowdfunding. So if Euro-esque, if hybrid 4X civilization building is something you're interested in, definitely look at this, but you need to be prepared to tackle the rulebook. So there's not a bad rules video from Easy Board Games, but it is like almost an hour long. So, that's a sort of before you go to game night type thing, but it definitely will help you get started. The other thing is that when it comes to crowdfunding, there will be an expansion called Beliefs and Betrayals, which Aaron kindly sent me. I hope I have a chance to play it and talk about it while the campaign is live. I don't know if that's going to happen, but if I do get a chance, I will come back and talk about this some more. I did read the rules for that. It's adding 2 new major elements to the game. One is a religious track, which lets you sort of develop bonuses and also different types of workers and things like that. And you can engage in that when you've done the first culture research. So it takes that culture technology that's kind of just points and makes it linked into the religion thing. But what I did enjoy particularly about the religion track, which does give you these extra options, is that the more religious your civilization becomes, the more expensive technologies get for you. So you have to sort of like sacrifice advancing up all the technology tracks because you're engaging more in religion.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not there's a correlation between religiousness and Luddites, I don't know. But certainly that's part of the modeling in this game. And you can build like sort of special buildings and things like that. And being religious helps a lot with the morale track as well, which is quite good. And then the other area that it adds is called, it's called Beliefs and Betrayals. The betrayal side of that is the spy network, where you've got these spies and these spy tracks where you can sort of invest in your espionage network, which is, and when I say that, it's really just a sort of a binary numerical value. But if other people come to spy on you, they're going to check your sort of spy defenses, and then you can negatively influence each other by doing these spy combat sort of sections. And what I liked about that is it adds an additional layer of player interaction. So that appeals to me in theory. Of course, we actually set up Beliefs and Betrayals with our first game and immediately realized that was going to be way too much and we had to ignore it. So unfortunately, we didn't get to play it, but hopefully I'll have a chance to look at that in a bit more detail. But if you were looking for a way to sort of interact with or create player interaction on the table, especially when there's maybe less scope for the sort of military interactions that come with moving your vassals around, then I think Betrayals is sort of seeking to add that functionality, which is pretty neat.
And that'll be on GameFound?
That's coming soon? To GameFound early November, yeah, probably not long after this episode comes out.
Nice.
But definitely do your research, because this is not an everyone game, you know. This is probably going to hit really well with the right groups, but those groups need to be people who are into big expansion, 4X, like the theme of building up a civilization, and they're interested in interlocking mechanisms, and they're willing to play something that's going to go on for 4 or 5 hours and has the potential for player conflict that could lead to sort of major setback.
Cool.